Hi everyone, and welcome to Exploring the Build. If you just found this place, then welcome. And if you're returning, I'm glad to have you back. I'm Alex, and this is my channel where we explore and theory craft different character builds for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Today, we're doing one of our quick builds where we'll be exploring a briefly summarized character build for Dungeons & Dragons. And as always with our quick builds, if there's ever a build you'd like to see me explore in the future, be sure to let me know in the comments below. Today's character build comes from Impish Information 7237, who wanted to see a build on Corum Jhaelen Irsei, I hope I said that correctly, the main protagonist of Michael Moorcock's Eternal Champion series. Based on Impish's consensus, he doesn't have a direct class that would easily tie into D&D, but he is primarily a strong and skilled swordsman with some abilities given to him from various artifacts, as well as a pact with a being called Shul. Now, since this is a named character from popular media, I will give the obligatory, this may not be the best way to build or play this character, given that I don't know a whole lot about the character and have never read the Eternal Champion series myself. I have done a bit of preliminary research into the character to learn a bit about the backstory and powers that Corum has, but that's not going to necessarily be enough to let us make an exhaustive build that mimics him one-to-one. That said though, I do have an idea that I think works mechanically well for D&D, especially with 2024 rules, which I did go back and check, and we are good to go ahead with. Either rule set could probably build Corum, but I have to agree with Impish here, getting Pact of the Blade early from the 2024 invocation rules. Now besides all that, we do have some abilities that we are actually trying to mimic. First off, like I said, he is an expert swordsman and duelist. I would take this to mean that he's going to be using a single-handed sword or perhaps dual wielding rather than a big two-handed sword, though you could potentially build Corum to do that as well. And as far as powers go, there are two that we definitely want to try to recreate, and those are the effects from the artifacts, the Eye of Rin and the Hand of Quill. I hope I said those correctly as well. The Eye of Rin allows us to see into other planes of existence, kind of like True Sight pretty much, and the Hand of Quill allows us to call upon the spirits of those we have recently slain. I think both of these features do have pretty good recreations in D&D rules, especially since the Eye of Rin, like I said, kinda maps onto True Sight really easily. Now as far as the build presented goes, that's pretty much all I'm going to be trying to accomplish, getting those two abilities and becoming an expert duelist. If there is anything that I miss, overlook, or genuinely just don't know about, I will say that I think our build as presented here has enough flexibility and customization that things could be swapped, dropped, or added in order to actually pick up whatever ability, feature, power, or skill set that I miss. Now with all that said, let's jump into the actual build. Starting in character creation with our origin, Corum is a reborn. At least I would say he is. Corum is a reincarnated, not necessarily resurrected or undead, but a being, this eternal champion spirit, that has been reincarnated into a new form, which is Corum Jhaelen Irsei in this series. A good analogy would be the Avatar from Avatar: The Last Airbender, but you can think of it as the same idea. We are a character that has lived multiple lifetimes, even though we don't have full recollection of actually living those lifetimes, just a small thread connecting us to them. This is all why I believe Reborn fits the best for our lineage or species, because we gain the knowledge from a past life ability, which is admittedly just a skill check ability, but it still flavors our character as though we have had previous lives. We're just not undead or a construct the way the Reborn is flavored in the D&D setting. We're instead a reincarnated being. For our background, I believe technically Sage would be the most appropriate because Corum is supposed to be a learned and studied character, at least from his background before all of the inciting events of the first book takes place. However, to just make sure that we can get the background right no matter what, pick one from a previous source book that you believe best matches Corum's origin, and then you'll be able to pick any origin feat that you think maps best onto Corum and you can increase any ability scores by either a +2 and a +1, or 3 of them by +1 each. For me, I'll say that we have the tough feat, since Corum is pretty tough and hard to put down, not just in terms of combat, but also in the fact that he can take a beating. We lose an eye and a hand pretty quickly, and I'd say you've gotta be pretty tough to keep going after that. And along with that origin, we're also going to improve our charisma by +2, and we'll say our dexterity by +1, though really you could put that +1 anywhere you wanted to. With those bonuses, we're going to want the following stats. We want 8 strength, leaving it alone, not putting any points into it. 14 dexterity, putting 5 points into it to get it to 13, and then our +1 to round it off to 14. We're going to put 7 points into constitution, getting us 14 constitution there. We're actually going to put 2 points into intelligence to get us 10 intelligence, as well as 4 points into wisdom to get us 12 wisdom. And then finally, we're going to put 9 points into charisma to get us 15, with a +2 to bring it up to 17. Corum is by far our most well-rounded character, because I wanted to make sure that we hit a few different bases without specializing into any specific stats. I feel like Corum is a bit more general than specialized, at least on paper. Looking at the actual level breakdown of the character build, we're going to start off with tier 1, which is levels 1 to 5. We're going to be a warlock 4 and a fighter 1. With these early levels, we get Pact of the Blade to actually start being a proper charisma-based duelist right away. We can also follow that up with Fighter 1 in order to pick up a fighting style as well as our weapon mastery. So now, depending on what weapon we have, we can actually use the appropriate mastery. Fighting style is a little interesting here because you could pick dueling or 2-weapon fighting depending on what combat style you actually want. However, if you wanted a way to mimic the Eye of Rin right away, then getting the blind fighting style gives us blind sense for 10 feet, which is a very limited version of what the Eye of Rin could do, but it's still close enough to be able to mimic it at level 2 like this is pretty nice. Once we get to level 3 Warlock, we get our actual Warlock subclass, and here we become a Hexblade. Hexblade is going to be necessary later on in the build, but it also allows us to actually dual wield with charisma-based weapons, given that we can have Pact of the Blade on our main weapon, and we can use Hex Warrior to make our secondary weapon scale off of charisma as well. If you didn't want to dual wield though, you can just ignore that. Finally, for our first feat, there are a couple different options to pick up. If you did pick up blind fighting as your fighting style, I would pick up another fighting style feat here and pick either 2-weapon fighting or dueling, depending on what you wanted to actually use. If you didn't want to pick up either of those, or you didn't pick up blind fighting originally, then in that case, pick any general feat that improves charisma by +1 to round our charisma off to 18. Also, in terms of extra invocations to pick up, since we'll get all the way up to 3 right away at level 2 Warlock, you can pick your favorites. We really only want Pact of the Blade for now, for sure, so the other 2 can be any invocations that you think would work really well with Corum, or that you would just want to have in general. Tier 2, we are now a Warlock 6 and a Fighter 4, and here we gain a few different things, including our second feat, our Fighter subclass, as well as our ability to mimic the Hand of Quill. That is a Cursed Spectre. A Cursed Spectre says that when we slay a humanoid, we may choose to raise its spirit as a specter, literally from the monster manual. But when it appears, it also gains temporary hit points equal to half our Warlock level, and it gains a bonus to its attack rolls equal to our Charisma modifier, so it's got a little bit of a buff. This ability maps pretty much 1-to-1 onto the Hand of Quill, since the Hand of Quill lets us raise the spirits of enemies that we have slain. I don't know if Corum ever actually uses those spirits in combat to fight alongside him, but at the very least, we can do what the hand says we can do, and that is really nice. In terms of some other combat bonuses though, it's time to look at us getting a bit more magical power as well as becoming more of a duelist. Starting with our invocations, we want Thirsting Blade as well as Eldritch Smite. That way, with our main weapon, we can attack twice, and then we can also dump an Eldritch Smite onto an enemy once per turn if we so choose. For our fighter subclass, we will go with Battle Master, and you can pick any maneuvers that you would feel fit Corum or that you just like to use in general, but the one I really want us to pick up is Riposte, or Riposte. It is a very nice duelist-esque maneuver that also gives us a reaction attack that isn't just an opportunity attack. This will be important later in the build, but just know it's a pretty nice option for us to take. Finally, for our second feat, if you haven't improved your charisma yet because you took blind fighting and then a fighting style feat, now is when we would improve our charisma by +1 to get it up to 18, thanks to Fey Touched, Shadow Touched, or any other charisma half feat that you would like. But if you already got charisma up to 18, then we're actually going to want to grab Sentinel here. Sentinel will give us an extra way to potentially get a reaction attack off of our turn beyond just a regular opportunity attack or the riposte maneuver. At tier 3, we are now a Warlock 9 and a Fighter 6, but that is a tentative Fighter 6, and I'll talk about why closer to the end of the build. For the time being though, the next invocation that we definitely do want to pick up is Life Drinker. Life Drinker says that once per turn, when we hit a creature with our pact weapon, we can deal an extra 1d6 necrotic, psychic, or radiant damage, our choice, to that creature. Also, I guess it's a good time to mention now that the new Pact of the Blade allows us to swap the damage type of our pact weapon to necrotic, psychic, or radiant whenever we hit an enemy with that weapon, which is also pretty cool and maybe flavorful for Corum, depending on what type of damage he deals most in the books. This is just nice for flavor for us and to bypass resistances as well. Back to Life Drinker though, not only when we hit an enemy can we deal that extra damage, but we can also expend one of our hit point dice, or hit dice. Then after we expend it and roll it, we regain a number of hit points equal to that roll plus our Constitution modifier, meaning we can heal on our turn, as well as off of our turn because Life Drinker triggers once per turn. And that's why we were so dedicated to picking up both Riposte and the Sentinel feat. Now we can feel like a pretty dangerous duelist because not only are we going to be attacking enemies on our turn, but also really easily off of our turn, and we can potentially heal on either of those points of attack. We also have 2 more feats now at this tier to worry about. Technically, potentially 1 based on that Fighter 6 asterisk. But assuming we get both feats, what we're going to want to do is pick up Sentinel if we haven't picked that up yet. Otherwise, pick any other feat that you would like. If you wanted a defensive option, Defensive Duelist is going to be a really good option for us here, because we should always be using a finesse weapon. We're just using charisma with it instead of dexterity. And even though the Defensive Duelist feat improves our dexterity, it allows us to use our reaction to improve our AC by our proficiency bonus, not our dexterity. So this can really help us save on using shield spells because we're getting attacked quite a bit. We can now save those spell slots and still boost our AC. After that, our 4th feat, or just a different option in general, is going to be improving our charisma by +2 to just cap it at 20, not worry about anything else. Finally, we're tier 4, which is Warlock 14 and Fighter 6, or, like I said before, the asterisk of Fighter 5, because we might want to go Warlock 15. Warlock 15 gets us Witch Sight. Which sight? That sight. Witch Sight is a Warlock invocation that, like I said earlier in the video, gives us True Sight. And this is the exact mimicking that we would need for the Eye of Rin if we wanted it and didn't have Blind Sight or didn't feel that Blind Sight really did enough that we wanted. Doing this just means that we lose out on a feat, so we would drop the 4th feat that I talked about in the previous tier, and instead we do pick up our True Sight invocation, which is kind of going to be like our capstone, but it's not the end of the world. We do still also get a feat anyways in this tier, and this can just be dealer's choice. You can pick whatever feat you want or really speaks to you that might feel like Corum would like to have. My personal favorite is Mage Slayer, for reasons I've mentioned in previous videos, because it is a powerful feat, but also because it feels like a feat appropriate to a character who is going up against literal gods and slaying them. He kills at least 3 gods that I know about, maybe even more. After we get that feat though, and potentially before we get Witch Sight, we also gain the Hexblade's Curse capstone, which in most of the builds I've used Hexblade with has been very rare. In fact, honorable mention to this build, this is one of the first ones where I have taken more levels into Warlock rather than Fighter when combining Warlock and Fighter. The reason for that is because of the invocation Devouring Blade. This is something we definitely want to pick up at level 12, and it gives us a third attack with our packed weapon when we take the attack action and attack with our packed weapon. Again, if you're dueling single-handed, that's still pretty nice because that's 3 attacks with that single-handed weapon in the dueling fighting style, as well as any other damage boosts that we might have, like Hex, Hexblade's Curse, or anything else. But if we're dual wielding, that'll be 4 attacks along with any other damage boosts that we may have. And that's also pretty nice. It's just that we would have to make our packed weapon a light weapon, such as a scimitar. Now, all that was why it is really nice to be a warlock instead of a fighter, but also what's pretty neat is the fact that we get Master of Hexes, which says that once we defeat the enemy that has our Hexblade's Curse attached to it, we can move the Hexblade's Curse to a new enemy within 30 feet. The Hexblade's Curse still only lasts for a minute, or if it ends early for any other reason. As long as we don't die or get incapacitated, having that full minute to use Hexblade's Curse on multiple enemies potentially is a really big bonus for us. It gets past the usual use of Hexblade's Curse in a multi-class build. All you're doing with it is popping it on a boss or big elite enemy and just getting as much damage out of that enemy as possible. Now we could still use it against the big bad, but also once they go down, pop it over to a minion, or pop it to a minion first, get rid of them quickly, and then pop it over to the big bad. And now it's time for the summary. Overall, we are hopefully really close to recreating Corum. Like the request had sort of mentioned, there isn't a lot to go on for descriptions of powers, but we do know that there were the 2 artifacts, which we did try to mimic. The hand was pretty easy, given that a Cursed Spectre is basically 1-to-1 for that. And the Eye of Rin is kind of close. Blind Sight does a really poor version, but it's available really quickly, so I think that's a fair trade. Whereas Witch Sight is more of the exact 1-to-1 recreation, but it is a bit of a capstone rather than something we can get very quickly. We are also, of course, a very strong duelist. We have 3 attacks with our packed weapon, a potential 4th attack with the Nick Weapon Mastery. We can deal a bunch of damage from damage boosts like Hex, Hexblade's Curse, Eldritch Smite, you name it. And on top of that, we have Life Drinker to both deal a little bit more damage and heal once per turn, which we're hopefully getting to trigger at least twice a round, given that we have both Riposte, Sentinel, or maybe just a regular old opportunity attack. All of that does not even mention other maneuvers that we could be popping onto any of our attacks to just dish out some extra damage. Now, of course, the one big caveat to the build here is Battlemaster really the best duelist for us? Another very tempting option would actually be the 2014 Swashbuckler. We would still get plenty of attacks, given that our attack action would be the same because it's scaling off of Warlock rather than Fighter, and we could still dual wield thanks to the Nick property no longer interfering with our bonus action. In fact, we would get a more on-demand bonus action from going Swashbuckler Rogue thanks to Cunning action. Plus, we would get all the Charisma synergies with our initiative. Plus, since we're already getting a lot of reaction attacks in order to potentially trigger Life Drinker multiple times in a round, adding Sneak Attack onto that just kind of makes sense in terms of a synergy. The one thing to keep in mind is that if we did want Witch Sight or just to have more levels in Warlock, that would mean that our Sneak Attack isn't going to scale too high, so we would really be banking on getting it to trigger multiple times in a round to pump up our damage. I think that Fighter, especially being a Battlemaster, gives us more of a versatile toolkit to have more generic options in combat and how we want to go about our duelist playstyle, rather than being more of a skirmisher that the Swashbuckler pushes you towards. They give you fancy footwork so you can ignore opportunity attacks, and that they kind of want you to do some sort of hit and run combat playstyle, which maybe we don't want to do. Maybe we want to just walk up, stand in front of an enemy, and lock them down with both our attacks and our reaction attacks, and just keep them there until they go down, dueling them one-on-one and proving that we are the better swordsman. Other than that though, that's the entirety of the build. Let me know what you thought of it or what you would add or change to get closer to the theme of Michael Moorcock's Eternal Champion character. And thank you so much for coming on the journey with me, and I hope to see you in the next one.